morning, guys. What did we see in the last class? ஞாபகம் இருக்குதா? ரொம்ப நாள் ஆச்சு. Revolts and rebellions. So we looked at the different revolts and rebellions that happened during the British era. Individual sets of revolts, localized revolts, which happened throughout the British time, and we also looked at one major revolt, the revolt of 1857. The revolt of 1857 was in fact a huge turning point in Indian history as well as in British colonial history, and that revolt of 1857 was something that the British did not expect, and the British felt that they were almost thrown out of the country. That's how bad they felt. Now this revolt shook the British spirit in so many ways that the British took it upon themselves to ensure that such a revolt never happens again in history. They wanted to take every possible precaution to prevent any such revolt coming up once again. This was the impact of revolt of 1857, and the aftermath is what we are going to see in today's class. The aftermath, where we talk about the administrative changes which happened after the 1857. Now, how did the administration change? How did the administrative structure, character, nature change after 1857? As I just told, it changed in such a way that the British wanted to prevent any further revolt like this. That's all. This was the underlying premise on which they were operating. Now, when you look at this administrative changes based on this premise, you will notice that a number of changes is taking place in different aspects of administration, in various aspects of administration. What those changes are, we will see. It is, of course, the revolt of 1857 is, of course, a turning point in modern Indian history and a turning point in the entire colonial history. The colonial British Empire started out in 1400s. It started out in 1400s. It ended only after Second World War. So obviously, almost a 500 period history. Of those 500 period history, revolt of 1857 is considered to be one of the most important, if not the most important part of colonial history of the British era. Now, the British decided that no matter what, we have to accept certain things. We need to accept that there are certain gaps here. We need to understand and we need to come to the fact that the company's rule is not popular in India. It is certainly not popular. People do not like the company rule. People do not like the way how they were being treated by the company. When I say people, it means people in general, but even specifically, the peasants did not like the way, the zamindars did not like the way, the Indian leaders who lost their kingdoms did not like the way how the company ruled. So every section which participated in the revolt of 1857, that did not like the way how the rule was conducted. This was the basic inference for the British, and they decided that this needs to change drastically. Because the revolt almost kicked the British out, and the British felt that they cannot afford to lose India. India at no cost should be lost. So therefore, they wanted to change things drastically, and that's why they brought in direct rule of the British government into India. The company has been abolished, and they brought in the direct rule of the British government through the Government of India Act of 1858. The British Parliament is the one which is going to say each and every aspect of British colonial presence in India. Now this Government of India Act of 1858, it made a lot of changes in administration. Now the first and the most basic thing which the British did now is that now they formally announced that India is a colony of Britain. Only now they are announcing India as British colony. Earlier it is just an Indian possession by the East India Company. Now it is a colony of the British government. The word colony is usually more formal than the word possession. Colony is used only when it is occupied by the formal decree of the country which is occupying. The government has to formally declare that as a part of its country, and only then it is a colony. So now here they are saying that this is a colony of Britain, and the British Parliament will take direct responsibility over the functioning of this Indian colony. And they say, because it is a formal announcement now, the designations are also going to change. From now on, the Governor General of India will be called as the Viceroy of India, because the term Viceroy is used only for a person who is a representative of the crown. A representative of a crown is called as a Viceroy, and therefore India gets a Viceroy, like Canada and other countries. Other countries already had Viceroys, now India is also getting a Viceroy. Now, the power exerted by the board of directors of the company directors, whatever the power they had, all that power which was exercised from the company headquarters in London will be taken over by yet another entity, a newly created entity, which is called as Secretary of State. So in India, you have the head called as a Viceroy. In Britain, you have this person called as Secretary of State. Secretary of the State will take over the board of control back in the board of directors in Britain. Viceroy will take over all the functions of Governor General. This is the case. Now the Secretary of the State, you should know, he is actually a member of Parliament. A member of the British Parliament is the Secretary of State. This Secretary of the State used to represent the British Parliament to the Indian colony, and the Viceroy will represent the Indian colony to the British Parliament. This is how these two power centers are present. In future, we will learn about Minto-Morley reforms, Montego-Chelmsford reforms, and all these things. In all those reforms, the name itself is actually comprised of both Secretary of the State and the Viceroy. Minto-Morley, Montego-Chelmsford. One is the Secretary of the State, the other is the Viceroy. So from now on, it is going to be these two people who are going to dictate terms as to how Indian administration should be conducted. Now the Secretary of the State is going to control the affairs of East India Company's functions in India. Now consider this scenario. You are working in a company and your boss is asking you to say that whenever you come into the office, you need to swipe in, and when you leave, you need to swipe out. Okay, fine, that happens everywhere. And whenever you are going to lunch or any bathroom break, then also you need to swipe in and swipe out. So it looks a little exceedingly controlling, but still that's also doable. Then whenever you are speaking to somebody else, that's also should be recorded and informed. Whenever you do some work in your laptop which is not a part of company's job, that also you should report. Whenever you come by a bike, that bike should be registered to the institution. It should be registered, recorded by the institution, and that specific place where you need to park, only in that place you can park. Like this, if they keep adding instructions on and on and on and on, you will feel as if you are in a jail. That's how you would feel. You will feel as if you are not able to do anything by yourself, and as if you are there simply to work like a machine. This is what certain companies do, and this is what is called as micromanagement in business terminology. Micromanagement. Wherever there is micromanagement, nasama poidum business. Wherever there's micromanagement, people won't have the liberty to think. Their entire focus will be only on following the protocol. They won't have any original thought. So micromanagement, wherever it is brought in, it is disastrous. The British are going to bring in micromanagement in India. They are going to bring in micromanagement also. The biggest concern for the British is they felt that India is so far away. India is so far away, and it is very difficult to correspond with the Indian counterparts. So whenever they try to send instructions to India, it takes several weeks, even a couple of months to reach India. And by the time it reaches India, the situation would have completely changed, making the instructions invalid. Whenever they get a response back, that also takes multiple weeks to come to Britain, and the political situation here also changes. This made it very difficult for the Secretary of the State to control the affairs of India. So he felt that this is the place where there is a need for intervention. Because the Secretary of the State, he is a politician, he is not a businessman. He is a politician who is now thinking that if I have better control over it, I will be able to administer properly, and I will ensure that such a revolt doesn't take place once again. So this is what they were struggling with initially, and with time, what happens? They develop something called as submarine cables. Submarine cables were developed for connecting Britain and India through telegraph. When it was connected through telegraph, what used to take 2 months now takes only 20 minutes. So initially these guys were looking at all the records after everything happened. Now in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, they send telegraph to India, and they also expect messages to come back from the Viceroy. So this is how instructions were sent by the British to India, and the Viceroy also replied back to the instructions. But you should know, these micromanagement activities by the Secretary of the State was not liked by the Viceroy. The Viceroy has always been somebody who was independent. Now you go even further back, before the time of Viceroys, before the time of Governor Generals also, there were simply 3 governors, one in Bengal, one in Madras, and one in Bombay. 3 governors were there. 3 governors were actually happy with the way how things were going on, and they were having complete autonomy from one another. Because of the Regulating Act of 1773, they formalized these 3, and they told that one province is going to control the other 2. Bengal going to control other 2. There itself we will notice that the governors of Madras and Bombay were not really happy with that. They were not happy to give away their power. But nevertheless, they pushed through that, and eventually the governor of Bengal was then the Governor General of Bengal, and eventually made the Governor General of India. That created some more tension with the other 2 Governor Generals, other 2 governors. And now Governor General has gone, Viceroy has come with an all-encompassing power, and this Viceroy is now made a dummy by the guy who is sitting in Britain, Secretary of the State. So now obviously the Viceroy is not going to like how his position is getting diminished. So this is the constant struggle for power that you notice happening throughout history. In a brief period in between, Anna University was broken into 4 universities. If you remember, Anna University was broken into 4 universities, and the Vice Chancellor of Anna University, Guindy campus, he did not like the way how the university was broken, because that means his power is diminishing. So power struggle is seen all through history. It will happen. It will continue to exist even further. The point being, these parts of history when we study, we should not study that like just a text. We should not read it mechanically. Understand that these guys are also similar to the type of people that we meet and see today, and they are also undergoing the same kind of dilemma and problems in decision making like we do. That's what you should think about. Now, the tussle between Secretary of State and the Viceroy is going forward. It is not really reconciling very anytime soon, and the Viceroy kept complaining. The Viceroy told that the Secretary of the State is sitting very far away from India and he is dictating the terms as to how Indian administration should be conducted. Now, he is sitting so far away, some of the Secretary of State has never come to India, has never been to India. How come they order us around stating that this is how the administration should be run? It is not fair. The Viceroy complains. The Viceroy complains, and this was not really accepted initially, but the British Parliament, after repeated complaints, they agree that maybe the Secretary of the State needs some more insight. Maybe they need some more insight. And for that insight, what should we do? We shall put a number of advisors for Secretary of the State. So a group of advisors will be assigned. So now they said that Secretary of the State along with these advisors will form a new council back in London, and it is called as India Council. India Council will comprise of the Secretary of the State and his advisors, and while choosing the advisors, the British told, we will pick those people who have worked and served in India for a period of at least 10 to 15 years. So, it is these experienced people who will be advising the Secretary of the State. Now, remember, all these confusion, commotion and reforms are happening because of 1857 revolt only. As a result of that revolt, they are now hastily trying to change things, and that's why all this commotion is happening. But nevertheless, they said that we will actually form this India Council. The problem with India Council, name la India, ulla or Indian kuda illa. There is not a single Indian in that India Council. So, India Council is formed without Indians in it, and obviously Indians did not like it. But of course, Indians had absolutely no say here. And the Viceroy was also still not convinced. It appeared as if the British were only trying to empower the Secretary of the State. The British Parliament was only trying to empower the Secretary of the State rather than actually giving Viceroy more autonomy. So, of course, he was also not all that encouraged by these actions. But nevertheless, the institution is created, it is set up. The Viceroy will be there, Secretary of the State will be there. This was the case. This will be the case till independence. The first Viceroy is also the last Governor General of India, which is Lord Canning. The first Secretary of the State is Lord Stanley, the guy after whom the hospital is named after. Provincial administration. Now, we just discussed what happened at the central level. At the center, there was a tussle between Secretary of the State and the Viceroy. That's what we looked at. Now, let's go to provinces. Now, these provinces, how are they defined? How are they demarcated? The three big provinces, the three biggest provinces, Madras, Bombay and Bengal, all these three provinces from now on, they will be formally referred to as presidencies. They will be called as presidencies. And these presidencies will be administered by a governor. As usual, governor. And this governor will have an executive council consisting of 3 members. Governors, executive council. Now remember, the viceroy, the governor and the executive council and the viceroy's executive council all will be appointed by the crown. Everything will be appointed by the British crown. Now the presidencies are the biggest provinces. Apart from presidencies, there are also other provinces which are present, smaller provinces. Now the presidencies are ruled by the governors. The smaller provinces are ruled by the lieutenant governor, and sometimes even smaller provinces are ruled by chief commissioner. So this is the designation of the rulers of different levels of administration. The Act of 1861 marked a turning of the tide of centralization. See, when people are insecure, when people want to have good control over things, what do? They end up taking as much power with them as possible. Example, Chandragupta Maurya. Example, Ashoka. Example, Sher Shah. Example, Akbar. All these people used to centralize the government. One more classical example, Alauddin Khilji, the one who centralized every aspect of his administration. See, this is happening because for 2 reasons. One, insecurity, but more importantly, they want to have a say in every aspect of government, every aspect of governance. Now the British, they are now a wounded animal. They are now scampering around India trying to control all aspects of the country. Now at this juncture, obviously they want to have a better control over every aspect of administration, and they end up centralizing so much of power into their own hands. Already so much of power is taken over by the Secretary of the State sitting in England. Within India, from all the provinces, powers were absorbed by the central government. Why? Once again, they don't want one more revolt like this, and they want to have things in their control. And that's what you keep noticing. On the one hand, while they try to centralize the government, on the other hand, they are also faced with other difficulties. See, that Government of India Act of 1858, the one after the revolt, it said that the British government will take over India, and in India the British will establish something called as responsible government. Now responsible government, it means the government is responsible, obviously, but that's not the only way to look at this phrase. Responsible government means parliamentary system of government. It means parliamentary system. Why? In a parliamentary system, every member of parliament is responsible and answerable and accountable to the people who elected them from their constituency. That's why this is called as a responsible government. In the type of government that is practiced in the United States of America, you will notice that it is an executive style of government, where the president is of course answerable. He's answerable, but by and large, he or she can do things in their own way, in their own terms. They don't have to take a permission from anybody else. They don't have to answer to people right away. You look at the way how the wars are getting declared in Middle East today. Back when Barack Obama was a president, he unilaterally declared that he is going to involve in Yemen, Somalia and in other parts of the Middle East. And he called all his NATO allies. Now Britain is one of the NATO allies. David Cameron was the Prime Minister over there, and Barack Obama invited David Cameron also to bring in the British troops into this war zone in the Middle East. David Cameron, unlike Barack Obama, simply did not declare war just like that. He went to the parliament and he passed a resolution asking for everybody's support to accept for this war. And only when everybody said yes or no, based on that, he took a decision. Everybody said no. And he was not able to bring all the troops into war. Only certain specialized troops were allowed to enter into the conflict. The reason being, all the others, they felt that they are answerable to their British constituencies, who will question, why are you going to war once again? And therefore, they said that we don't want to go to war and we will not accept, we will not allow you to get this resolution passed. That is responsible government. In the US, after declaring war, Barack Obama will ask for the approval from the US Congress. If they deny the approval and if they cut the funding, the war has to end then and there. So here, responsibility comes after action. In India, through the Government of India Act of 1858, they said that we will try to create institutions of responsible government in India. Meaning, representative government in India. Now, this is promised in the books, in the law, and therefore the British have to provide for these institutions as well. They need to provide places where representation of Indian interests are present in the governance. Now, here is where the problem is. One hand, these guys want all the power for themselves because they want to control the country. On the other hand, the law promises divestment of power to the people of India. So, here is a conundrum. Now, what do the British do? They go and they do develop these institutions called as legislative councils. They create legislative councils, mainly legislative councils at the provincial level in Madras, Bombay and Calcutta in Bengal. In these three places, they create legislative councils. Legislative councils institution is created, but was it truly representative of Indian interests? The answer is no. It is not. It is not, because in the legislative councils, it was essentially the British who were sitting over there telling that they are representing Indian interests, and it was Indians who were nominated by the British who were sitting there. Who were nominated? All the people who favored the British. They were the ones who were nominated. So on the one hand, they told that we have kept our promise of creating such an institution. On the other hand, they certainly did not keep their promise, because it is a complete hoax. It is not really true. This responsible government or parliamentary system of government, also known as Westminster style of government, that is promised, and Indians are going to ask for this again and again and again and again throughout the rest of modern history, until they decide that fine, you don't give us anything, you just get out of India and we will do that for ourselves. That's what they will end up asking later. Now, all the provincial legislative councils, as I told, they were not given a lot of power. And even those who occupied were actually either the British or the stooges of British. They were not true representatives. And these people, they were merely advisory bodies. They were giving advice only. That advice is not binding. Not binding on the governor, governor's executive council, or even on with the viceroy. It is not binding. It lacked power. It lacked authority. And no matter what they try, they are not able to hold on to even their own authority and power. The reason being, these legislative councils were created in the provinces. In India itself, the central government is trying to gather all the power to itself, which means already these legislative councils, which were weak by its composition, is going to get even more weaker, because even the governor and governor's executive council of the provinces are not having enough power. All the power getting absorbed by the viceroy. This is the case. Now, from viceroy standpoint, he says, whatever revenue that is generated throughout India, in all those different British provinces, whatever the revenue may be, all that revenue should come to the central government, should come to me. And From here, based on whatever your requirements are, I will allocate funds for you, he says. Now, this was proposed by the Viceroy, and none of the governors of different provinces liked it. Governors, lieutenant governors, chief commissioners, none of them liked it. They did not like it because whatever revenue that they get, it needs to be sent to the central government. And later, whatever expenditure they have, they need to give a huge bunch of reasons as to why they are committing to those expenditure, as to why those expenditures are happening, and only then the British will allocate money. And while doing so, they will ask 100 questions for every penny. So this is the reason why people don't really like the locals, the governors of provinces and lieutenant governors didn't really like the way how this revenue is distributed. The central government exercised even the minutest expenditure. They exercise control over the smallest of expenditures committed by the provincial government. And the provincial government is shamelessly spending so much amount of money. They are also spending so much amount of money, and they are not really bothered by the restrictions put forth by the central government. This is how there was a huge administrative debacle year after year among the British administrators in India. They were trying to fight with each other. And all of this started to change only from 1870 onward. From 1870 onward, this system of changed for almost one whole decade. What I described so far was the scenario. From 1870 onward, things started to change. How did it change? Well, Lord Mayo comes to India as the Viceroy, and he says that for all the provinces, you need not give me the reasons for each and every expenditure. By default, you will be allocated so much amount of money. You will be given so much amount of money. This money is a grant which is given to all the provinces by default, and if you want anything beyond that grant, then you will have to follow all the protocol. So this marks the first time after 1857 where there is decentralization. Some amount of financial decentralization is witnessed. Fine. This was done by Lord Mayo, and then Lord Mayo exits the scene, and then comes Lord Lytton. Now Lytton comes to the scene, and what does he do? He says that I want to expand the grant amount even further, and I want to decentralize more authority to the different provinces held by the British in India. Now decentralization is going even further. And then comes Lord Ripon. Lord Ripon says, from now on, there is no need for the provinces to send their complete share to the center. Provinces, how much ever they earn, they can keep it with themselves. Apart from giving the share for the center, everything else they can keep it with themselves, and they can spend however they want. So he is the one who managed almost complete decentralization. So initially after the revolt, you find lots of centralization happening, and then you find decentralization happening. See, why would somebody want to decentralize is the question. Decentralization meaning you are giving away power. Why would somebody want to give away power? They would want to give away power because it is not possible to control everything by one person. One person cannot control all aspects of governance. And those people who have tried controlling everything and failed again and again, they know that it is not going to work, and they will decide that it is time that we give power and responsibility to others, so that by and large we can simply sit and regulate and orchestrate governance rather than controlling governance. So decentralization is the next phase that is seen here. Now Lord Ripon, the guy whose name is put in the Chennai Corporation building also, Ripon building, that's named after him only. Lord Ripon is the only viceroy in entire British Indian history who was liked by the Indians. The only viceroy, because of his very compassionate attitude towards Indians. He is such a stark contrast in comparison to other viceroys and future viceroys also. Ripon, it doesn't mean he was all noble, but certainly he took steps which were radically pro-Indian than British. Now you look at the local bodies as well. We looked at the central government, then we looked at the provincial government, now we look at the local bodies. In the local body administration after 1857, what were the changes? Initially, because of all that centralization, local bodies did not properly exist and conduct themselves properly. It was in shambles, it was in complete shambles, and nothing was really taking place in the local level, at the local level administration. But with people starting to decentralize, the local bodies also find that fund is flowing through them. As fund flows through them, they realize that they are also now able to engage in governance of their own constituencies, their own locality. Local bodies start forming into groups having members who are both British and Indian members, and they are the ones who are taking decisions on how local administration should be done. This is on paper, but in reality that was not the case. It was still dictated by the British only. Now if you look at the local bodies themselves, the British told that Indians will be given a lot of position in local bodies. While they say this on the one hand, they told that Indians will be a majority. Not right now, but maybe in the future. But right now, Indians will be there in the local bodies. Now, Indians are thinking, at least we are getting represented here. That's fine. As long as we are represented, it should not be a problem. But the British told, you will be called as non-officials and we will be called as officials. Why? Because the British told, officials are people who are the ones who actually take decisions. Non-officials are those people who will sit in that room, who will be staying in that local body room, community room, and they can tell their suggestions, they can vent out their grievances and everything, but it is up to the officials whether to take into consideration your suggestions or not. Mostly 99.99% they never took the suggestions of the people. The British did whatever they wanted. So the Indians realized, while they did promise space for Indians, it was just a space as a spectator of governance rather than actually involving in decision making. So obviously the Indians did not really like this. And in fact, the British actually used the local bodies as a tool to extract more taxes from the people. And that's how the Indians also looked at these local bodies. They told that these local bodies are actually instruments of extraction of Indian revenue from the people. And therefore, they said that we do not respect this. Now Lord Ripon comes and Lord Ripon says, elections will be conducted. Elections will be conducted for collecting all the Indian representation into the local body. He says, Indians will be non-officials only. Indians will not be given the position of officials. Indians will be non-officials, but those non-officials can be elected through actual election, where people come together and select their leader. This was promised by Ripon. Now this, when Ripon promises, was not liked by the British government. They didn't like it. Ripon goes on to say that when these non-officials who are elected, who are there, they can be in the majority. If the local body officials are say 10 in number, non-officials can be 15 or 20 in numbers. They can be in the majority. And also, the chairman of the local body can be a non-official. So this is how much of privileges Ripon gave to the Indian public. And this was of course not liked with the British. They protested against this. Ripon not only did this, he did so many other things as well. We will see that subsequently. But nevertheless, point being, the local bodies were given some amount of leeway so that Indians can enter into decision making process. They said elections will be conducted. There's where lies the problems. Elections were hardly conducted. It was promised, but it was hardly conducted, saying that we promise that elections will be conducted whenever it is suitable, whenever it is possible. Now it is not possible. It is going to take some more time. Why? Because of some reason, administrative reason is there, or maybe some local law and order issues there, we won't conduct elections. They kept on postponing it. And when they did conduct the elections, when it did take place, they restricted the electoral roll. They restricted the number of people who can vote. And the people who can vote was made less than 1/10 of 1% of the population. 0.1% of the population of a local constituency were only elected, were only allowed to vote in elections. So this is the case with regards to local body elections. Now you look at the army. The British held a series of important decisions and changes in the British Indian Army. Now the British were very, very clear. It is because of the army only the revolt started. They were the culprits who started this. They were the ones who did not accept whatever the British told, and they were the ones who instigated many commoners also to join the revolt. So the army needs to be reorganized. We cannot get rid of the army. It needs to be reorganized. When they decided that it should be reorganized, they told that the first thing that we are going to do is, now that the East India Company is abolished, we will fuse the Crown's army, the Royal Army, Royal British Army, with the East India Company's army together. Both will be fused. Now, both will be serving only the British Crown. Number one. Number two, they told that we will ensure that the members of army are placed in different positions in such a way that they will never be able to coordinate and unite with each other against us, against the British. We will plan it in such a way. Now, how would we do that? We will actually try to put conflicting groups together. We will try to encourage conflict among the army members. How? We will see subsequently. But the first thing is, you should not give Indians control over important arms and ammunition. All strategic key arms and ammunition was held from now on only by Europeans, mainly British. Will only be held by the Europeans. The Indians will not be given any position important enough to have control over important ammunition. Example, tanks. Tanks, artilleries were held exclusively by the Europeans only, not the Indians. Not only that, the proportion between Europeans and Indians is also going to get changed. The amount of Europeans are going to increase in the army and the Indians are going to decrease in the army. If you remember, in the third Modern India class, I told that out of the 3,11,000 and odd soldiers, 2,65,000 and odd were Indians only. Less than 50,000 people were only British or other European nationals. Which means, earlier vast majority of them were Indians, and now the British are going to say that we are going to change this proportion to maintain a European domination over Indians. Did it mean that they brought in so much of Europeans into India? The answer is no. Still the Indians are in majority, but how they maintain European dominance, we will see. The first thing that they did was they raised the number of Europeans, the ratio, the number of Europeans to number of Indians in Madras from 2 to 5. Meaning, for every 5 Indian soldiers, there are 2 European soldiers in Madras and Bombay. In Bengal, for every 2 Indian soldiers, there is a European soldier. It is very high in Bengal. The reason being, Bengal was the hotbed of that revolt. It is from Bengal only all this commotion started. So in Bengal, they are going to increase the number of European soldiers to 1/3 of the total strength. In other places, which was not all that active during the revolt, in those places also they increased, but not to a great extent. This is how they increase the proportion of British soldiers, European soldiers in the army. And not only that, they also ensured that the Indian soldiers who were earlier denied promotion beyond a particular rank, that is still continued. They said that we will never allow any Indian soldier to get promoted beyond a particular point. This was also promised. The Indians were excluded from the officer corps, and organization of the entire army structure, army members and soldiers will be based on one policy, which is balance and counterpoise. It is called as balance and counterpoise. What is balance and counterpoise called? It is actually divide and rule. That's what we call as divide and rule policy. How did they divide and rule? They put a group of Hindus and Muslims together in one corps. They put Muslims and Sikhs together. They put all Hindus but belonging to different castes, higher and lower, together. So by doing this, they managed to create a mosaic within each and every company of soldiers, wherein which everybody is going to stick to only their own group and they are not going to collaborate with anybody else. This division was created, and this division, of course, helped the British in keeping the soldiers at bay. None of the soldiers tried to once again collaborate with their fellow soldiers and fight against the British. Now you notice, discrimination was of course practiced while recruiting the soldiers itself into army. Recruiting the soldiers itself. What kind of discrimination? Now the British told that in India there are 2 groups of people. One group of people are called as martial race, meaning those who are born soldiers. Then there is another group of people who are called as non-martial race, those who are not good enough to become soldiers. And they told that the Sikhs, the Gurkhas, the Pathans, they are all of martial race. Bengalis, Awadis and others in and around north of India, they are all of non-martial race. The reason why they created this racial structure is because those who helped the British were now termed as martial, those who fought against the British were now termed as non-martial. This racial structure was created and invented by the British to separate these 2 groups and to ensure that the so-called non-martial groups never enter into service once again. This is how the British Army was restructured later. Now, all the previous issues with regards to army, even that is getting addressed. You remember, in the earlier times there was this General Service Enlistments Act as well as Religious Disabilities Act. All those acts told that no matter what you do, no matter what the British officers and commanders say, you need to follow that to the dot. You should not question, and you should not cite your religion as a reason for not following orders. Your order is to not wear the tilak, not to have a beard, not to show any of your caste identities. That was the order earlier. Now the British say, practice that freely. Practice your culture, embrace your tradition, embrace your caste. It is your pride. practice that freely. The British encourage. Now that the British encourage this, all the soldiers also start practicing that, and in their own company they will notice that there are very few members of their own community, but there are members of other communities present. Everybody is going to assert their community identity, because of which they are never going to come together once again. They have created division forever. All these loyalties were encouraged by the British for one sole purpose, which is to not allow these people to come together. But even that is not the actual purpose. The actual purpose is to prevent the rise of nationalism among the soldiers. They did not want nationalism to get developed among the Indian soldiers. Now by this time you should notice there are a number of newspapers which are getting printed in India. So many newspapers are printed. And all these newspapers, they are getting printed and they are the ones who are spreading the idea of nationalism. They are starting to explore this concept called as India, concept called as nationalism, a nation called as India. And the British, what do? They deliberately ensured that the soldiers do not have any access to such newspapers. The soldiers were kept far away from these newspapers, and they were even punished if found in possession of these newspapers. All these efforts were taken by the British to prevent the rise of nationalist spirit among the British Indian soldiers. But unfortunately, this effort will fail, because after a couple of decades from now on, nationalism is going to spread like wildfire all through the country, and the British will not be in a position to actually control the soldiers. Changes in public services. You look at public services, how it has changed. All the different administrative positions, those administrative positions are held primarily by the British. The British were the ones who are conducting administration. They are the ones who are taking all the decisions. They are calling all the shots. And the Government of India Act of 1858 says every Indian will be given the right to apply for a government job and get it. A government job will not be denied in the name of caste, creed, religion, or any other communal or community based identity. No identity can deny an Indian of a position of government servant. This was promised in the Act of 1858. However, the British officials who are sitting in India, they are refusing to shed their power for their Indian counterparts. There are many British intellectuals back in Britain who say that you give some positions to Indians so that they feel that they are also involved in administration, and that is going to create some amount of warmth between us and the Indians. Give them something to actually hold on to. But the British sitting in India, those guys say that how do you expect us to share our power with all these brownies? We cannot share our power where we and them can sit on par with each other. It is not really acceptable. They refuse. But the law simply states that Indians should be given authority. Indians also should have equal opportunity for such employment, it is told. And here is where the concept of Indian civil services comes in. IAS officials were usually nominated from the people in Britain. And it was in fact Lord Macaulay who says that IAS officials should be instituted based on a competitive exam. And it should be based on merit only. So they conduct examination and they say that Indians are also now allowed to take this exam, and the first Indian to crack civil service exams is Satyendranath Tagore. So Satyendranath Tagore is the first Indian to crack this civil services exam, public service exam. Satyendranath Tagore, is it related to Rabindranath Tagore? Yes sir. How? Brother. Satyendranath Tagore is Rabindranath Tagore's brother. We will go on to learn about Rabindranath Tagore's father also and sister. Family வந்து சரியான மூல family. Everybody is intelligent. Satyendranath Tagore is the first civil servant, first Indian civil servant to join the ranks of ICS officers. Now, when I say that they were given the position of ICS, Satyendranath Tagore cleared this competitive exam and got into service. It was not easy. These exams, these competitive exams which are conducted, it was designed in such a way to prevent Indians from entering into service. Today, while reading all these subjects, we are getting so much of headache. நாடாது எப்போ பார்த்தாலும் இதாக சொல்லி இருக்கிறாங்க. எக்கானமியில் என்னடனா 1000 விஷயம் சொல்கிறாங்க, பாலிட்டியில் 1000 விஷயம் சொல்கிறாங்க, ஹிஸ்ட்ரி புக்கை திறந்தாலே தூக்கம் வருது. So today we find things so difficult. But let me put things in perspective. How things were some 150 years ago. And then you decide whether today it is difficult or not. Let me tell you how things worked. The first is, the exam was conducted in London. It was conducted in London and you need to go and take the exam in London. So you take prelims, சரி மெயின்ஸ்க்கு நம்ம இந்தியா வந்துட்டு போகலாம், தீபாவளி கொண்டாட்டு போகலான்னு வருவீங்க. இந்தியா வர்றதுக்குள்ள அங்கே மெயின்ஸ் ஆரம்பிச்சிடும். அப்போ என்ன பண்ணுறது? ஸோ எக்ஸாம்ஸ் ஆர் ஹெல்ட் இன் அ வெரி வெரி ஃபார் அவே பிளேஸ். The medium of instruction was only English. There was absolutely no other medium of instruction. So even today, the vast majority of Indians don't know English. That is the case. Even after 70 years of independence and 200 years of British rule, vast majority of Indians still don't speak English, which is not a bad thing. It is just a fact, a matter of fact. Back then they told, if you want to become an IAS officer, you have to talk in English only and you have to write eloquently in English. நமக்கு இருக்கிற இங்கிலீஷே வரமாட்டேங்குது, இதில் எலோக்வெண்ட்டாக வேற பேசணுன்றாங்க. So you have to write this exam in English and you have to go and write it in London. Fine. Some students, while doing this group mentoring and all, they come and tell me, sir, history, when I open the book, it looks like Greek and Latin. For those people, I tell you something. Greek and Latin were actual syllabus of UPSC back then. Greek and Latin are actual subjects which were tested. And you were supposed to write about classical Greek, Latin and Hebrew in that test back in London. இப்போ சொல்லுங்க, உங்க சிலபஸ் ஈஸியா கஷ்டமா? So they were testing Greek, Latin, Hebrew and all these other subjects, classical languages. And one final point here is the upper age limit for appearing for this exam. What is the upper age limit today? 32 for general, and then you have relaxation for different categories, reserved groups. Yes. So 32. What is the lower age limit? 21. Everybody can appear from 21. Back then, the upper age limit was 23. And that 23 was reduced to 19. So, by the age of 19, most of us were writing our arrear exam. And at that context, if you are asked to study English, study Greek, Latin, Hebrew, go to London, write an exam, and then clear it. So now you understand who Satyendranath Tagore is. So now things are put in perspective. This is how exams are conducted back then. As you can see, all jokes apart and all seriousness, this was designed specifically to exclude Indians as much as possible. They wanted to lay down laws and they wanted to eliminate Indians. ஆனால் நம்ம ஆளுங்கெல்லாம் அதையும் தாண்டி போவாங்க. So that's the kind of people who went and cracked this exam. After Satyendranath Tagore, there are many other examples also of people who have cleared this exam. One very famous example is a guy who cleared this exam, but he told, I don't want to take this job. That is Subhash Chandra Bose. Subhash Chandra Bose cleared this exam. என்ன தனாவட்டு இருந்தா எக்ஸாமை கிளியர் பண்ணிட்டு he told, I don't want this job. People won't tell that even today, but he told this during British era. told that சும்மா எழுதுன ஜாலிக்கு அப்படின்றாரு. Subhash Chandra Bose clears ICS exam and he doesn't take the job. So there are multiple examples of Indians entering into service, and after 1920 you will notice that large numbers of Indians are entering into ICS positions. So many Indians are entering, and this will continue on until 1947, when you will notice that in fact 55% of all officials in India are Indians only. So that will happen towards the independence only, and only then the British will lose grip over India and they will quit and leave India. But that's for another day. Now you look at other departments, other public departments, railways, public works, important positions in all these other government services. All those positions are reserved exclusively for British. Indians could not appear. Positions of mayor, positions of commissioners, everywhere it is reserved for the British only, not the Indians. The Indians, they in fact, many of them now joined the British because they wanted regular salary, and so many Indians functioned as agents of the British only. Many more Indians were so loyal to the British because the British were the only ones who were giving them proper salary, monthly salary, and therefore they were loyal and they served as British agents in India. Viceroy Lord Lansdowne, what did he say? He says there is a deliberate reason for keeping Indians out of this. He says there is an absolute necessity for keeping the government of this widespread empire in European hands, if that empire is to be maintained. Which means, for us to control this empire for a long period of time, this empire should be maintained and it should be held only by the Europeans and not the Indians. Indians should be kept away. And of course, gradually, because of the pressure put by the Indians, more and more important administrative positions will be given to the Indians, and not only that, more and more positions will be given to the Indians in legislative assembly with power also. That's going to take some time, but it does happen. Changes in relations with the princely states. How did the British change their opinion while handling the princely states? That's the next question. Now what you see in this map, all the areas marked in red, those are all completely held and controlled by the British. All the areas marked in yellow, that is the princely states in India, meaning the states ruled by other Indian kings. This is the scenario, this is the map. Now, during the revolt of 1857, if you remember, all the Indian princely states remained loyal to the British. They were all loyal and they aided and supported the British against the mutineers. Now, because of this particular fact, the British realized that the Indian princely states can be their loyal agents, can be their actual allies in India. And they told that we will change our approach towards our relations with regards to these princely states. But initially they did say that Lord Canning himself told that the crown of England, the British crown, is the supreme power, it is the paramount power in all of India, which comprises of the British provinces as well as the princely states. Meaning the princely states are also subservient to the crown. He first announced it. And all the princes, they were all made to acknowledge this fact. Everybody acknowledged it. Why? They had no other option. Earlier, either they have to accept to the British and stay in power, or if they sided with the people, either the British will throw them out of power or the people will throw them out of power. These guys wanted power, so of course they sided with the British and they accepted the British paramountcy. Lord Curzon, he later stated that in fact the princely states are also holding their land in the name of crown only. That land also belongs to the crown, to the British crown. It is not something that the Indian princely states can claim ownership with. They are holding it in trust of the British crown. And the princes, they accepted to this also. They became junior partners for the British Empire. Why? Once again, no other option. Once they have accepted and once they have taken to what the British have told, there is absolutely no way in which they can back off now. And the paramount power told that if we want to enter and take your territory, we can. If we want to enter and change your internal administration, we can do anything that we want. But the British also maintained that from now on, we will specifically avoid any annexation. We will not annex any territory belonging to the princely states. And the British kept to their word. They never annexed any territory after this. They believed that it is because our conquest after conquest, unfaltering, unwavering, unstoppable conquests. It is all those conquests which led the Indians to develop so much of resentment against the British, which led to the revolt. And therefore, from now on, we will drop the policy of conquest. Instead of conquering the territory, we will control the territory through other means, the British told. And in some cases, territories which were conquered were actually given back to their old ruler. They were reinstated to the old ruler. While doing all of this, the British already told, as I told already, they proclaimed that the British crown was the paramount power and Queen Victoria assumed the title of Empress of India. Empress of India. Now, other administrative policies. What other administrative policies changed? If you look at the British policies after 1857, it is visible in every aspect of administration. It is also visible in the form of the attitude they showed towards Indians. Now, the Indians tried to rebel against the British and they tried to throw the British out because they did not accept the British rule, and they told that the British rule is not fit for us, is not fit for the Indian people. After suppressing the revolt, what did the British say? They told this revolt is in fact evidence that Indians are incapable of ruling themselves and therefore we have to stay in India. So they both are using the same event for posing different views. And the British, because they are the victors of this revolt, what they said stands. It is standing now. They told that it is imperative that from now on, India is always under the hands of the British because Indians are not good enough to rule themselves, the British told. They followed many specific perspectives while handling Indians. Certain policies were undertaken. Divide and rule policy. The hostility that the British showed towards educated Indians. Changes towards the attitude, changes of attitude towards the zamindar. Change in attitude towards social reformers and restriction of press. All of this form the various British administrative changes apart from the actual governance. What these changes are, we will see one by one, starting with divide and rule. Now, the divide and rule policy was taken up by the British simply because of one fact which kept on itching the British, which is how can the Hindus and Muslims come together during the revolt? How is it that these two groups, which were always at odds with each other, how did they manage to join hands and fight us? That should never happen. And therefore they decided that we will take measures to break this unity. This unity should not be existing. If such a unity is existing, this will happen once again and it will also lead to nationalism. So we need to break it. If the people are focused only on their own internal divisions, they will not think about something of higher intellect, something like nationalism. And that's why this policy is very important and it is the cornerstone of British policy after 1857. It is this policy which they undertake now which will result in the breaking of the country during independence. So what is this divide and rule policy? How did they employ this policy? The British told that this revolt actually happened through this Bahadur Shah Zafar. Bahadur Shah Zafar was the leader who instigated every other Indian to join the revolt. When this is done, all other Indians also joined the revolt. When Bahadur Shah Zafar came and announced that he is the leader, everybody else joined. Bahadur Shah Zafar was instigated by Bakht Khan, and all of this indicate that it is the Muslims who spearheaded this revolt, and therefore Muslims are the culprits. Hindus are the unforced victims in this situation. They were also tricked into taking part in this revolt by the Muslims, and therefore Hindus should be favored, Muslims should be suppressed. The British decided. Soon after the revolt of 1857, this is what they did. They kept doing this for a long period of time, where Muslims were crushed in different ways. Now this went on to a point where there were many Indian intellectuals rising, both amongst Muslims and Hindus, but the number of Hindu intellectuals were higher than the number of Muslim intellectuals. Now from 1870 onwards, this policy was reversed, because now there are more educated Hindus than Muslims, and the British did not like that. Why did they not like that? It is because these educated intellectuals, Hindus and Muslims, both of them were the ones who perpetuated, practiced, propagated the idea called as a nation named India. And nationalism was spread by these educated intellectuals, and they were majorly Hindus. In late 1880s, in the mid of 1880s, they even went on to start an organization called as Indian National Congress. So the British did not like any of this, and they felt it is the fault of Hindus that the society is having such amount of disparity. So Hindus need to be oppressed and Muslims need to be protected. So the British, they from then on, from 1870 onward, they took a lot of effort to give privilege after privilege to the Muslims, like what they did for Hindus earlier, and they oppressed the Hindus at every turn possible. Now initially, both Hindus and Muslims, they were able to understand what is going on. They were able to understand that the British are trying to divide and rule the entire country. But when you keep seeing things again and again where you are suppressed and the other person is given a lot of privilege by the government, there is going to be some amount of jealousy getting developed. This jealousy was initially seen in the Muslim community, later seen in the Hindu community. The same jealousy is what is going to keep these two communities separated throughout the British era, and this is how the British divide and rule policy was way more effective than what they originally assumed. They not only prevented nationalism, they in fact prevented complete isolation of people, which is going to come back and bite the British during independence time. That's a different story anyway. There is also a sharp division in the way how government services are awarded. See, while awarding government services, the British specifically created something called as the reservation system. Now, in the modern times, we all have reservation system. We have seen reservation system throughout our education, through schools, colleges and everything. This reservation system is created based on identifying socio-cultural problems and rectifying those problems. Here there is a lot of profound thought and insight which has gone before announcing the reservation that is practiced today. But back then, reservation was practiced specifically to ensure that people are competing with each other and people are going to be at each other's throat in that competition. In one aspect, they will support only one group of people and everybody else will be angry with that community. Whatever it may be, it could be a religious community or a caste community, whatever it is. Then they will side with the other and create antagonism among the other community as well. This is how the British played Hindus and Muslims against each other and people of different caste in India against each other. That is the divide and rule policy of the British. We also notice that the British showed hostility towards educated Indians, meaning they were very, very antagonistic and inimical against educated Indians. They did not patronize educated Indians from now on. Why? As I just explained, these guys were the ones who went on to start criticizing the British and spreading nationalism. Now this happened step by step. Initially, the educated Indians did not take part in any of that national movement. They did not take part. They did not, sorry, not national movement, in that revolt of 1857. They did not take part. When they realized that the British are using disproportionately high amount of force on Indians, they realized we need to do something about this. They started educating themselves even further and they started encouraging education amongst Indians. This is what we notice in the initial generation which is rising after the introduction of modern education into India. Higher education also enters at one point because of British reforms. Higher education enters and higher education also enlarges the perspective that the Indians had over the British. Now it's more and more education with more and more exposure to global events that is happening. The educated Indians are reading what is happening in France and Britain and other parts of Europe, and then they are coming back to India and they realize that what is being practiced in India is something that is very, very unethical. The colonial practice, the colonial designs are understood by the educated Indians and they start criticizing the British. They start analyzing and they start criticizing the British. This criticism went on to generate enough amount of political awareness amongst Indians, and little by little this concept of social and political awareness spreads to different parts of India, and then they develop something called as nationalistic idea based on this awareness. So for that nationalism to rise, it is the efforts taken by these educated Indians which paved way. So obviously the British are not going to like the educated Indians, and the British in fact took so much of steps to curb education beyond a particular point in India. They did not want education to spread to all parts of India because they did not like the idea of spreading of these nationalist thoughts amongst Indians. And since this is against the British interest, they tried as much as they can, but eventually it is these Indians who will go on to found the Indian National Congress in 1885, which will kickstart a completely new phase of modern Indian history. Then the attitude towards zamindars. Now the zamindars were already friendly to the British, and during the revolt the zamindars were pro-British. They subdued and crushed the mutineers in their locality, which meant that the British were very grateful to the zamindars, and the British hailed zamindars as natural leaders of India. They told that zamindars are the only true leaders in India. So all those people who side with them are the true leaders, are the true soldiers, are true everything. The British are now redefining those statuses. Now, zamindars were told that their own political and economic privileges will be protected. Their lands will not be confiscated from now on. Many of the zamindars who lost their lands were given back to them. And from now on, you will notice that whenever there is a revolt happening, whenever there is a peasant protest happening, the British will use the zamindars as the counterbalance for the peasants. They will instigate the zamindars to go and crush them. They will make the zamindars do their dirty job. This is how the zamindars were used. Of all the zamindars in India, the guy whom you see in this picture, that is a very important person. Who that person is, we will see subsequently only, not right now, but is a very important person. Just remember his face very well. So remember his face very well. We will come back to him in a couple of classes. Attitude towards social reformers. Social reformers were initially encouraged and patronized by the British, if you remember. Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, all these guys went and campaigned against certain evil practices that is going on in India, and the British accepted that yes, these practices need to go away, and they went on to abolish them through legislation. Sati was abolished, widow remarriage was made lawful. So all these changes were seen before 1857. Widow Remarriage Act was passed in 1856, an year before the revolt. In fact, a few months before the revolt. All of this happened before 1857, and after 1857, that is not the case. The British realized it is us interfering in their tradition which has led to all that resentment. So therefore, from now on, what we will do? We will no longer interfere in the Indian tradition. Whatever the Indians want to do, let them do. In fact, we will encourage them to do that. If you want to be superstitious, let them be superstitious. If you want to encourage child marriage, let them go for child marriage. They in fact went on to become protectors of these evils, social evils in India. And Nehru says, the British actually formed a natural alliance with the local orthodox sections of Indians. It is these culturally orthodox sections of Indians who were protesting against those social legislations. Those social legislations, though it is an interference, it is a needed measure. And these orthodox conservative people did not like that, and now the British are opposing the social reformers and siding with these orthodox conservative people of Muslims and Hindus. This is how the British manipulated the Indian people, and they encouraged the Indian people to follow all the social customs. So those people who actually needed government intervention, they never got that help after this. This was the change in attitude towards social reformers. Restrictions on press. You look at the way how press evolved in India. The earliest press in India came in 1780. In 1780 itself it has come. And that press was introduced into India by the British only. But with time you will notice that there are many more Indians who are taking up publishing journals as their own livelihood. They are focused only on making their own journals and publications, and they want to spread their thoughts and ideologies. In the modern times, when we read, when we want to actually tell the world what we want to say, we post it on Facebook or Instagram. If you want to get a little formal, you post it in your blog. If you want it even more formalized, then you post it in your website. That's all. Back then, they didn't have any digital infrastructure to post anything. And they focused only on press. They focused only on newspapers. And through those newspapers, they spread their ideas. The press is something that is very important in Indian freedom struggle. The role of press is something that is very important and is often asked in prelims as well as in mains. Mainly in mains. If you look at educated Indians who knew how to read and write any language, not alone English, any language, they were the ones who started out with printing so many different magazines. Now you look at the way how British treated Indian press. See, there is this British Governor General called as Charles Metcalfe. Charles Metcalfe was the one who lifted all the restrictions which are put on press. Charles Metcalfe, what did he do? He told that from now on, Indian press need not have any restrictions. They need not face any kind of restriction. They need not purchase license. They need not register themselves. They can simply print whatever they want in their own way. He was the one who liberated the press of India, and in fact he is called as the liberator of Indian press. So from now onward you will notice that all educated Indians feel empowered because of this decision, and they went on to start their own press, their own magazines and journals and newspapers. It is through these newspapers, magazines and journals that many Indian leaders started spreading their own ideology with regards to nationalism. Now, all these nationalist ideas are getting printed. It is getting printed all over the country. As it is getting printed, you will notice, because nationalism is being printed, obviously they are going to criticize the British. The British government's policies were dissected by these people, educated Indians, and they were criticizing these policies, like how Hindu newspaper does today in the editorials. So in the editorials, what they do is essentially try to analyze what the government does, and wherever needed, they will criticize it. Similarly, back then, it was analyzed and criticized, primarily criticized. This was the case all through the press. Now remember, the number of people who were speaking English is very less. There is not a lot of people who can understand English. There is not a lot of people who can read and write English. So obviously, when I say newspapers and journals, it is mostly belonging to languages which are local languages, regional languages, spoken by the people of India, not English. And these local languages are called as vernacular languages. Most of the newspapers, you will notice, are vernacular language newspapers only. There are 200 vernacular language newspapers in 1870. 200 vernacular language newspapers in all of India, and only 20 English newspapers in all of India. These criticisms are done in both, but mainly in vernacular languages. Now, the idea of printing newspapers in vernacular language is because people of India, some of them might know English, but vast majority of them knows only to read and write their own mother tongue, their own vernacular localized language. So, whenever they are criticizing it in local language, it is reaching even the common masses. Those who are not necessarily completely educated, even they are able to understand what the British are doing. Now, this was not liked by the British. The Indian newspapers are exposing all the vulnerabilities of the British government, and this was not liked by the British. And the British Viceroy at this point in time, his name is Lytton, Lord Lytton. And Lytton is not pleased by this, and he says that I want to restrict the vernacular press. I want to restrict vernacular press. So he says that I am going to pass this Vernacular Press Act of 1878. This act says, wherever there is a newspaper or a journal or a magazine which is criticizing the British, which is criticizing the government, the local magistrate can call forth the editor of that newspaper. The editor will be called forth, and that editor will have to register himself with the judge, with the magistrate. He will have to register himself. Upon registering himself, the editor will be given the duty to deposit some money with the magistrate. He will have to register, he will have to deposit a money. That money is refundable. It is not something that the British is going to take away. It is a deposit by the editor of that newspaper. And the editor will be given a warning. He will be given a warning stating that you have been criticizing the government and you are now registered here. We have all your details, and you have also given a safety deposit, some amount of money. Now, if you criticize the government once again, if there is an article which is criticizing the government in your newspaper once again, we will consider that you have forfeited the safety deposit. You will no longer get back the money. If you continue to publish that article, what we will do? We will confiscate your press and we will throw you in jail. This is what the Vernacular Press Act is about. And they told, this is to ensure that articles which will rouse feelings of disaffection against the government should not be published in the vernacular press, in the vernacular languages newspaper. This is how it was put forth. When this was put forth, Indians didn't really care. They said, if you want arrest us. They went on to publish, they went on to criticize. When they criticized the government again and again, what did the British do? They of course carried forward the registration and deposition of money, safety deposit. And they still continued to publish articles criticizing the government, and that led to the confiscation of press, stoppage of that newspaper, and even it went on to imprison these people. When people were imprisoned, that's when it created a huge amount of political commotion in India. The press is essentially gagged, as you can see. It is gagged, and this was not liked by the people of India. The people of India were now completely against the British. Now remember one thing. Certain things cannot be changed. Certain things cannot be taken back. I'll give you one example. Consider that there is a state, an empire. Maybe it is still there. Consider that this empire has been in existence for the past 3,000, 4,000 years. One monarch, one family is ruling. For the past 3,000 years, it is ruling. As it is ruling over the past 3,000 years, consider that just in 2020, they decide that we will not have the monarchy right now. Monarchy will no longer function. We will allow people to have all civil liberties and all their civil privileges enjoyed by states in other democracies, like what other democracies do. Monarchy is no longer present. Let them do this for a period of, say, 3 years. For 3 years, let the people enjoy all those rights. For 3,000 years, they were subservient. Their rights were curtailed. But for 3 years, all rights were given. Now in the 4th year, try to bring back that monarchy. People won't accept. Liberty, freedom, once given, cannot be taken back. Indians were growing this habit of reading newspapers. Indians are now getting slowly politically aware. They were in fact going in search of these newspapers to read about the different articles written by different educated Indians. They are now educating themselves politically very well. Everybody is politically and socially very well aware. At this juncture, while criticisms of the British is going on, the British stopped the publication of these newspapers. When this was stopped, the Indians felt that their own civil rights and liberties, their own freedom is taken away. Now, until now, Indians had no sense of freedom or civil liberties. But once it is taken away, they understand that they had this freedom all this time along, and now all of the Indians are going to fight against the British, and this is what led to the Vernacular Press Act becoming a huge issue amongst the people of India, and people started protesting against the British. This protest happened under Lord Lytton, and Lytton did not care. He said, I don't care. It was in fact under the next Governor General that this act was repealed. Who was that? It was Ripon once again. Ripon is the one who told that this is not accepted, this is unwarranted, but We understand that there needs to be some precaution taken, but this is not the way how to take precautions. Let Indians conduct their journalism and press activities however they want. He repealed the Vernacular Press Act. And you should know, after this, once again, people loved Ripon a lot. But this is not the last time it is happening. During Swadeshi and boycott movement, once again press will be gagged. During Rowlatt Satyagraha, once again press will be gagged. During non-cooperation movement, press will be gagged. During civil disobedience movement, press will be gagged. During Quit India movement, press will be gagged. Every time Indians engage in some kind of revolt or movement against the British, the press is the first thing that is laid to waste. There are a number of people who actually had their own newspapers, magazines, journals. This is just a list of them. You can go through them when you get the slide. Racial antagonism. The racial antagonism portrayed by the British. Now the British often told themselves that they are racially superior than the Indians. They told that we are superior. And after the revolt of 1857, they went on to talk about the same thing only. They still insisted that we are certainly superior, and the revolt is proof that Indians are inferior and Indians are completely brutes and uncultured. They are brutals and uncultured people. This racial antagonism was resulting in multiple levels of segregation. There are so many places where only whites were allowed. There are places where Indians should behave in a certain way in front of the whites. All of this segregation was practiced all over the British colonies, all through the world. All over the world it was practiced. And it is that racial antagonism which resulted in one guy getting impacted in South Africa. And it is that racial antagonism which is going to create the biggest threat ever for the British Empire, British colonial empire, in its entire history of 500 years. And that is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. How he will come to picture, we will talk about it later, but nevertheless, it is that same antagonism which is seen. The backwardness in social services and social sector. The British kept Indians weak, to put it very, very simply. The British showed absolutely no sympathy or mercy towards Indians. The government spent most of its income in military. It is in military, in battles and wars which were fought within India and outside of India where all the money is spent, most of the money is spent. Apart from that, administration absorbed a lot of money. When it comes to social sector spending, health, education, nutrition, it was not really spent. It was not really a concern for the British. The British didn't care. There were a few steps which were taken for providing certain social services. For example, drainage. For example, drinking water. For this, certain steps were taken. But you should know, these steps had a specific knot at it. A specific way how it was performed. See, the British took care of themselves very well, while they did not care for the Indians who are living right next door. How? We will see. I'll give you one very personal example. There are so many of you who would have been here during the Chennai floods in 2015. Many of you would have even volunteered for helping people out. So I was also one of those volunteers. I was also involved, and we traveled from one place to another to give some food supplies to people who could not have food. So we were going in our own bikes, and we were carrying so much of food. Press was also with us. Press was also coming with us all along. This was the case. In some parts of Chennai, you will notice that we were not even able to enter that place at all. Velacheri, we could not get into Velacheri at all. The Velacheri flyover which was built back then, only the top of the flyover was visible. That's how bad it was. Mudichur, we cannot get inside Mudichur at all. We went to North Madras, complete extreme north, near Manali and Yennur. There near the seashore it was okay, but wherever the slums were, it was completely gone. We went to one of the most remotest place in Chennai. It is not even a part of Chennai city, it is not a part of Chennai corporation, but still comes under the district in one way or the other. That place is called as Attupattu. Attupattu is a village very, very close to Andhra border. So there we went, and it was actually a very shocking scene for us to see. It looked as if we were in Ethiopia. That's how bad it was. It didn't even resemble any part of India. People's houses, roofs were visible above water, and bodies are floating. The government, of course, it was trying to do whatever it can, but by and large, it was the effort of the volunteers and rescue workers who pulled back Chennai out of this misery. When we went there, we noticed that the entire village, comprising of some 100 or 200 houses, it was underwater, and the people of that village were actually stationed on top of a flyover, which is not even opened for public right now. People are sitting on top of that flyover. We gave food supplies to them. We brought in doctors with us, and they vaccinated them. They treated people with conditions and diseases. And while going back, we were going through central Chennai, part of North Chennai and central Chennai. In central Chennai, there was not a single place where there was stagnation. There was no waterlogging at all, anywhere. And I was genuinely shocked and surprised. My home is in T Nagar. There is also a friend's home in Adayar. All these places are flooded. These are supposed to be very developed places in Chennai. All these places are flooded. But central Chennai was not flooded. Then we were talking about this, and there is this one old journalist who was traveling with us, who explained why it was. Central Chennai was the actual Chennai, which was built by the British. When they built it, they anticipated such floods, and they elevated the ground several feet. And they ensured that all the water that flows in as flood water flows outside of central Chennai to other parts of the country, to other parts of the Madras state. This was deliberately planned by the British back then. When India got independence, the main focus was to provide for homes and creating urban centers. So government didn't really have time to think about all of this. So we went on urbanizing unsustainably without thinking of all these other consequences. And that's what is the difference between the British and the British and the Indians. Back in those days, the point being, whenever it came to their safety and security, the British spent as much money as possible to ensure their own safety. When it came to Indians who are living right next door, they didn't care. This was a visible personal experience that I had, which is a proof of this policy followed by the British. They never cared about the social services of Indians. Not about sanitation, not about drinking water, not about schools, not about hospitals. Nothing was there for Indians. British had every possible privilege that they can purchase. Labor legislation is also conducted. Labor legislation. The British started reforming the Indian labor. Indian labor force were reformed. Now, the conditions of laborers in India was very, very bad. Obviously, very bad. Now remember, there is not a lot of industries in India. There were some industries were built in India, which were actually trying to create some items, some goods in India. These finished goods were exported to other parts of the world minimally, but mainly sold to other Indians. These industries were going on in one place, and it is the laborers working in these industries that I am talking about. Indian laborers working in these industries are working in a very miserable condition. They do not have proper sanitation, there is no proper toilets, there is no proper rest, there is no protection against hazardous machinery and hazardous substances, and everywhere you notice that laborers falling sick or getting hurt or even getting killed is common. It happens very freely. Laborers were made to work from 12 to 16 hours a day. 12 to 16 hours a day they were made to work, and there was no weekly day of rest. They were working 12 to 16 into 7 into 365. That's how they worked. There was absolutely no holidays. Women and children also worked as long as men. Everybody worked for such a long period of time. The wages were very low. How low? As low as rupees 4 to rupees 20 per month. That's how much they were earning. For this salary, laborers were working. Now the British say, such a pitiable condition is not acceptable. The laborers should be given better working conditions, they should be given better wages, and most importantly, they should be given better amount of rest. The British say. Now the British, when they say that they need to protect and give some welfare measures to laborers, we get a doubt. சும்மா அவங்க சொல்ல மாட்டானுங்களே, ஏதோ உள்நோக்கம் இருக்குது. They have something in their head for all of a sudden starting to care about the laborers in India. So obviously that question can be answered if you consider what happened in Britain. So in Britain, the British manufacturers, they have already dismantled the Indian manufacturing. Indian manufacturing is almost non-existent. Only some amount of manufacturing is happening in India. That too very minimal amount of commodities. But the British manufacturers, they say even that should not exist. That should not exist. But obviously they cannot try to legislate everything from Britain. So they say, we want to protect the Indian laborers. We want to protect the Indian laborers from these harsh conditions where they are working. So they say, let us try to regulate the labor force in India through certain acts. We will try to improve the condition of laborers in India through these acts. And that is what we call as Factories Act of 1881. Factories Act. So what does this Factories Act say? Factories Act says that we want to deal primarily with child labor. Child labor. They say children below the age of 7 should not work in factories. Meaning from the age of 7 you can work in factories. Children between 7 and 12 should not work for more than 9 hours a day. So meaning after 13 you can work for more than 9 hours a day. Children would also get 4 holidays in a month. For the first time Sundays were off. All of this was given, and the act also provided for fencing around dangerous machinery. Now, Second Factories Act comes. Second Factories Act 10 years later in 1891. This act says that all workers will be given a weekly holiday. All workers will be given 1 day holiday in a week, and working hours of women will now be reduced to only 11, not more than 11 hours. Children will work only for 7 hours, not more than 7 hours. They said this. Now all these reforms are brought in, but no way they are mentioning that we will increase the salary of these people. They are reducing the work without increasing the salary. Now the question here is, why are they being so compassionate? To increase the cost of production in India. When all these leaves, restrictions and amount of work is given, restriction the age is also placed, it means that people can work only for so much amount of time, which means that the overall productivity in India will go down. If it goes down, they can pump in more British goods into India. So this is why the British manufacturers were having such a huge heartbleed for Indian laborers. That is the reason for this labor legislation. While they did all of this, realize they were doing it for Indian factories. All these Indian factories are owned by Indians. This Factories Act, both of them, were not applicable to any of the plantations in India. Why? Plantations are owned by the British. All the plantations in India are owned by the British, and this Factories Act does not apply over there. It applies only to the Indian owned factories. Now look at the plantation itself. Every plantation that you see today in India, they were all created by the British only. Tea, coffee, rubber, teak, whatever it may be. All plantations were created by the British. These plantation owners were essentially Europeans only. Almost no Indians were there. When the British left India, they had to give it to Indians only. That is the time when Indians had a possession over it. But by and large, it is held by the British purely. Now they told these plantations will not have all these laws imposed on them. Why? In plantations, British owners should be allowed to use the Indian labor force however they want. There should be no restriction at all, because these plantation crops doesn't grow in Britain. They need to be grown only in India. So obviously they should be given as much leeway as possible. The British gave all that leeway, and look at the way how the laborers are treated in plantations. Indian laborers were made to sign contracts. They were made to sign contracts stating that they will work in plantation for so many number of days or weeks or years or months, whatever it may be. And they will have to work pertaining to certain conditions, certain working conditions. If the laborer is not able to follow through with those working conditions, and if they want to quit, they cannot quit. Usually people wanted to quit because it is extremely difficult to work here. They were made to work for 16 and even more number of hours a day. They were always roaming on the plantation. They were made to roam. They hardly had food. Such inhumane conditions of work was practiced in the plantations, and in spite of all these inhumane conditions, if the laborers wanted to go out of plantation, if they don't want to continue to work there, the plantation owners have the legal right to have this laborer arrested. They can have him arrested because of breach of contract. So this is how the plantation owners were protected from these labor laws, and in fact they were given more authority to have control over their laborers. So all these are the different administrative changes that we see in India after 1857. The next phase that we are going to enter into is the socio-religious reform movements in India. The various socio-religious reform movements. Now these socio-religious reform movements, you should try to understand the context of that. Notice that the British are gaining control in India, and they are trying to modulate their administration in such a way that they are preventing any such uprisings like 1857. None of that is happening. But now you will notice that the British, while they are doing their thing, the Indians are doing their own things. The Indians are deciding to take things into their own hand. Now during this revolt, you notice that Indians realize something. Indians understand that we are failing again and again with the British because of certain fundamental flaws in our society. Our society has so many flaws. There are educated intellectuals who say that we need to spread this idea called as nationalism in India. Now all of a sudden you go and tell people that we are all Indian nationals and we should all be the same, and see whether the people accept or not. They won't accept. They don't even understand what nationalism is. They don't even know the necessity for nationalism. Everybody is very comfortable with their own identity. Their own identity being the communal identity. I am a Hindu, I am a Muslim, I am a Christian, I am a Sikh, I am a Jain. So such community based identity is there, or caste based identity is there, or region based identity is there, or even linguistic identity is there. Indians wanted to focus only on these identities, and they never cared about any other common identity encompassing all of India. This is what the Indians were doing right now. And all the people who want to change this current scenario in India, they realize that unless we address this problem, there is no scope for trying to induce nationalist spirit in India. Nationalism, for it to rise, you need a common platform amongst all Indians, and that common platform is not visible, it is not present right now. So here is where all these socio-religious reform movements come into picture. Socio-religious reform movements say that let us first try to identify the social defects which are present in our system, social problems present in the country. And upon identifying the social problems, let us try to work against these problems and eradicate those issues. What are the social problems we have? Caste system, communal disharmony, untouchability, the poor treatment of widows, poor treatment of women in general, lack of education, lack of employment. So these are all the major social issues, and let us try to fight against those social issues. People start. Now, when you try to address these social issues, many Indian intellectuals realize one thing. Almost all of these issues which we say that exist as problems in society today, almost all these issues are because of religion only. So if we want to actually reform the social issues, we have to reform the religion as well. And therefore, people will try to reform the society by reforming the religion, and that's what it is called as socio-religious reform movement. Now these social reform movements are going to happen in India. Now remember, these reform movements did not happen after 1857 only. No, it happened even before 1857. Even before 1857, starting from Raja Ram Mohan Roy, reforms have started. But the thing is, these reforms will gain steam only after 1857, because only then everybody will have the motivation and inspiration to change the society. All the Indians believed that the society needs to be changed and it needs to overcome different issues that are present. And they start engaging in such reforms. You look at the social justice reform movements happening in India. They are happening in different parts of India under different sets of leaders, fighting different sets of social issues at different point in time. Meaning, all these reform movements which we will be studying, they are all happening not simultaneously, not necessarily simultaneously, and not in a coordinated manner. It is happening individually, and these individual experiments by people, these individual reforms made by intellectuals, they are the ones who are going to push the society towards progress, and then nationalism will rise. That's how we will notice the change happening in the Indian society. All these reform movements happening in different time, different parts, under different leaders, fighting for different causes, they all have certain things in common. What they are? Number one, they all want Indian society to change. They say, Indian society is stagnant. This cannot continue. Enough is enough. We cannot continue like this. This has to change. Because of the stagnant Indian culture and Indian society, Indians are unable to make themselves better. And therefore, it is up to us to take up this as a challenge and fight for Indian progress. So all these guys want changes in overall Indian society and culture. And number two, what were they focused on? Almost everybody is focused on certain key aspects. The most important being the position of women. Almost everybody is fighting for the emancipation of women, also known as liberation of women. Everybody is fighting for women's rights. People are fighting against caste. People are fighting against untouchability. And people are fighting for the spread of education. These are the most important aspects of all these socio-religious reform movements. What are the specific causes that has led to these reform movements? We will try to understand. Specific causes, whatever they are. Impact of the British rule. Now the British, after they started controlling different parts of the Indian subcontinent, they certainly brought out their own style of administration, and the Indians were getting exploited and the British were able to walk scot-free. They were not really trying to appease the Indians in any way, and they were able to do whatever they want. The Indians, educated Indians, they still studied the British, and they realized that the British were able to do all of this is because culturally, scientifically, technologically, rationally, the British were superior to the Indians. That exposure led many Indian intellectuals to take up social justice reform movements. Efforts of European Orientalists. All these Orientalists are people of European origin but who think very highly of Indian culture. There are many such examples. James Prinsep, Warren Hastings, Thomas Munro. All these people are Orientalists who respected Indian culture, and they were the ones who went on to decode the Indian past and present it to Indians. Indians were not really understanding anything about Arthashastra. Indians didn't really know anything about Ashokan inscriptions. Indians didn't know much about Bhagavad Gita. It is being practiced. But it is all these Orientalists who translated it into other languages and popularized it amongst Europeans, and it got rave review from the European community. All the Europeans accepted that the Indians' ancient past was also very well developed and profound in its spirituality. All these rediscovery of India's past helped Indians to develop some confidence, and that provided the manure for the reform movements to grow. So efforts of European Orientalists is also one important reason. Christian missionaries. Now Christian missionaries are often cited as the reason for causing communal trouble in India. And that would be right. Yes. These Christian missionaries attacked all the evil superstitions and practices that is done in Indian societies. While it was still unwarranted for them to do, many Indian intellectuals accepted that that is actually a problem. What they point out in India is actually a problem which needs to be understood. And therefore, by way of attacking the Indian religions also, many of the hidden problems and superstitions were exposed, which helped the Indian reformers to take it up as a challenge and eradicate those issues. Position of women. 50% of the population is subjugated, is in a very, very depressed state. When 50% is in a depressed state, how can nationalism spread? How can progress happen? Progress has to happen only from home. It has to start from home only. And at home, you should try to empower women. All the reformers encouraged women's participation in leadership roles. They encouraged women's participation in every aspect of familial affairs. They encouraged women's education and women's empowerment in every aspect of a woman's life. Everywhere you will notice that this need for liberating women was accepted and acknowledged by almost every educated intellectual in India at this point in time. Casteism is also an issue. People were divided into numerous castes. It was initially 4 varna, but each of those varnas branched out into multiple castes, and that is not really acceptable to these educated intellectuals. They believe that this caste system is one of the fundamental reasons why Indians are not able to come together. Indians find it very difficult to have a common cause or a common purpose or a common identity for that case. For that case. So therefore, they believe that this multiplicity of castes has to go away. It cannot exist. And that's one reason why reform movements started out. Opposition to Western culture. Now the colonial enterprise, if you remember, they selectively did cultural changes in India in such a way that British goods and British tastes are developed in India, where Indians wanted to purchase more of European goods only. They wanted westernization of India. These reformers, they are opposed to that. They are opposed to that, though many of these reformers had very high opinion about Western culture. All they said was, we will take Western ideology and apply that in the Indian context. We will not simply copy whatever that is done in the Western nations. So, opposition to Westernization is also one primary reason for Indians to take up social justice reform movements. New awareness among enlightened Indians. Enlightened Indians, they essentially mean educated Indians. Now these Indians could be educated through Western education and also traditional Indian education also. They are also educated only and they are also enlightened. There are examples where people who are educated, who start questioning the existing social norms, who start saying that the reason why India, such a huge country, is being colonized and controlled by a handful of foreigners is because of the backwardness of the society, and that backwardness is because of the current social norms and culture. That current social norms and culture should be removed, it should be eradicated, says these enlightened, educated Indians. Example, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Dayananda Saraswati, Swami Dayananda, as well as Henry Vivian Desrosiers. Different groups of people fighting against social problems. Now, what are the types of reform movements? What are the ways in which these reform movements are taking place? The first will be the concept of reforming from within. So, one group of social justice reformers, they say, for a reform to happen, for a change to appear, for a change to happen, it has to come from within. It cannot happen just like that. It cannot happen all by itself. It has to come from within only. Only then that change is sustainable. Otherwise, it will not stay. It will once again revert back to its original position. So, one has to reform from within. That is one view. Then there is another group which says that is not really the case all the time. Sometimes changes must be imposed on people. Consider the case of single-use plastics. Have we been requested by the government not to use single-use plastics? We will not really bother. We won't even hear that news. Only when the government says, we are creating a law where single-use plastics is not accepted, and if anybody is found in possession of a single-use plastic is seen, they will be fined. Then we are now aware and we will not use it. Sometimes change has to come from above only. It has to come through legislation, and that is the reform through legislation. Example, Sati. Example, Widow Remarriage Act. And then reforms through symbols of change. How? I myself am a symbol of change, they say, reformers say. Example, Henry Vivian Desrosiers. He says, the social norms says that I should do this. I will not do that. The social norms say that I should not do this. I will go and do it. So this is a very radical approach towards reform, where he says that I will stand as a symbol who opposes the social norms that are present today, and therefore I will invite more people to join my movement, and that will change the society. This is also one way of approach taken by some reformers. Then of course, reform through social work, meaning this kind of reforms does not involve any religion, it does not involve caste. It simply says we will work towards the upliftment of Indian people, irrespective of what their background or identity is. That kind of reform also takes place. Example, Servants of India Society by Gopala Krishna Gokhale. So this is reforms through social work. Now, while we see the different types of reforms, what is the social base of the reform? Who are these reforms targeted at? See, reform means you are changing something, right? Who are you changing? Whose heart and mind are you changing? Is it the rich? The answer is no. Why? They don't have any incentive to change. Why should they change? Is it the poor? The answer is once again no. They don't have any means or resources to change. So the answer is the middle class people. It is those rising, burgeoning middle class which was targeted by all these intellectuals all over the country. They are the ones who are going to be targeted. So that is the social base. What is the intellectual base? In what approach intellectually you are going to take to address these social issues? For that there is three: rationalism, religious universalism and humanism. Rationalism, it says that things should happen based on evidence, based on rational thought. Everything should be objective and logical. So if you apply logic to some issue, you will know what is right and what is wrong. And with that intellectual base, I am telling that this particular social norm is wrong and this is right. So this is one view, one way of approach. Then you have religious universalism, which simply states that all religions lead to the same path. Every religion is the same, and by using this concept of religious universalism, I would like to bring about communal harmony in India. So this is religious universalism. Then you have humanism. Now when you look at humanism, humanism is a peculiar concept which is introduced into India, where it says every human has the liberty to live the life however he or she wants. Every human has the potential to progress in life however he or she wants. This idea is now well entrenched into the minds of educated intellectuals in India, and they are the ones who portray this humanism concept. This humanism concept also says every individual should be trusted with their conscience. You should trust that they will act in their moral conscience, and you should also trust that they will interpret the ancient scriptures, religious scriptures, whatever they are, to whichever religion they belong to. They will interpret the scriptures in a way which suits their progress. So however they interpret, it is their interpretation only, and the society should not try to teach them how to read scriptures. This is how so much of empowerment happens at an individual level. An individual is empowered to a great extent through humanism concept. So these are the different intellectual base for these social reforms, and there are primarily two streams of social-religious reform movements. Two streams primarily. These two streams are reform movement and revivalist movement. So what is reform, what is revival, you will try to understand. A reform is where I go outside of India, I learn something from outside of India, I bring that idea back, and I notice that for a problem which is present in India, I use that idea to solve that problem. This is reform, where I take ideas from outside the system. Now, for solving the same problem, if I don't go outside of India, if I simply read the Indian scriptures, ancient and medieval scriptures, whatever they may be, if I read them, and if I try to reinterpret those scriptures in a liberal way, in a progressive way, so that I am able to solve the same problem using Indian ideas alone, that is called as revivalism. So reform is where you take Western thoughts into Indian society. Revivalism is where you bring in Indian thoughts, you use Indian thoughts to address Indian social issues. Reform movements are happening in India, revivalist movements are also happening in India. These movements are not pertaining only to Hinduism. There are Hindu movements, Muslim movements, Parsi movements, Sikh movements, religious secular movements, Everything is happening in India. There are also lots of women's movements that's also happening in India. All these socio-religious reform movements happen for a period of almost 150 years in history. For more than 100 years, certainly. And it is these reform movements which will eradicate all the social evils that are present in India to a great extent, and it will once again spur the thought of nationalism, and from that base nationalism will be built in India from there afterwards. What those social reform movements are, how did nationalism rise after this, we will see in the next class. So we end today's class. Happy Diwali. Thanks.